I think one of the videos that I was the most proud of that we did on TMBS was a video we did after some pretty famous now Extinction Rebellion protests in the United Kingdom, where climate activists were shutting down public transportation, which really sent a lot of mixed messages, I think, to the public. It didn't make a lot of sense to folks argue, for the main reasons like, well, one, don't you want people to be doing public transportation? And two, because this was done sort of early in the morning, you're not getting people who are going out on a Friday night to the pub or something like that. You're getting people who are trying to travel into town to work their jobs, particularly difficult period of time economically that we haven't gotten out of, where a lot of people are very precarious. A lot of people do not have employers who are going to accept these kind of things, which meant that people are sort of getting punished for an action that some folks are taking. And was it something that was really creating a lot of allies? Our argument was at the time no. So I bring that up just to say that, like, in that spirit, we're going to be looking at two recent protest actions that I think have gotten a lot of attention. Is there anything you want to say before we jump into these?
Yeah, I do, and I think in the recent days, the two we're talking about, like, I think in all three cases, we're going to be talking like the Extinction Rebellion thing, the AOC Ukraine stuff by the LaRouche folks, and the Just Stop Oil soup can Van Gogh protest. I think, looking back on it now, I think you can grant a value to the whole raising the conversation talking point. Like, I think having the opportunity to go through with Joshua Kahn Russell and talk about those sorts of things as we did, I think that there's something that's not entirely invaluable. But I also think, like, we can be adult about it and talk about the different broader things and have those sort of critiques, like you said about the public transportation one. Generally, the one that I really am allergic to is the one that's just generalized as if people in general and their apathy is the problem. So, like, you need to snap out of your day-to-day life and start recognizing this problem. It's like, well, what am I empowered to fucking do about it? Right? Like that. And so that's why, and it's a bit of a message that is well known by this point, the fossil fuel, talking about your personal carbon footprint. Like, we know the road that leads us down. And so, like, I think I generally, like, I'm of a couple minds. Like, I think fair enough, fine. If you want to defend the LaRouche stuff or saying, and we could play that. Should we play that one now, or should we play the?
Well, let's save the LaRouche stuff for later, if that's okay.
Good. So we'll start with this is the protester herself.
Wait, so, like, I mean, just like in case, I think most people have seen this, but if you didn't, because we're just going to play, we're going to let the protesters, like, give their side of the story and their perspective on it, because I think it's worthwhile and important. Basically what happened is, two activists glued their hands to the wall and they threw a can of soup at a Van Gogh painting in the United Kingdom. And while they were sort of held up on the wall, they were shouting things like, the cost of fuel crisis is hitting people. People are going to have to make a decision between heating and eating, which I think is, out of all the things said there, is probably one of the best. But, a lot of stuff about how, climate doom's incoming, and we need action. We need action, right? And yeah, I mean, I think while there is some economic aspect to it, a lot of it is sort of like, wake up, everybody, the crisis is here. But anyways, let's let them, describe the content of the protests as they saw it.
Right.
Trusty soup can, part of my brand now. I would like to make one thing perfectly clear. We did no damage to the painting whatsoever. I was in court yesterday, heard that there's been minimal damage done to the frame, which is repairable and replaceable, and absolutely no damage done to the painting. It was behind glass, and we never ever would have considered doing it if we didn't know that it was behind glass and that we wouldn't do any damage. I mean, literally, we were sat there still glued to the wall. They wiped it off with a bit of kitchen roll. I recognise that it looks like a slightly ridiculous action. I agree, it is ridiculous, but we're not asking the question, should everybody be throwing soup on paintings? what we're doing is getting the conversation going so we can ask the questions that matter. Questions like, is it okay that Liz Truss is licensing over 100 new fossil fuel licenses? Is it okay that fossil fuels are subsidised 30 times more than renewables when offshore wind is currently 9 times cheaper than fossil fuels? Is it okay that it is there in action that has led us to cost of living crisis? Where this winter we're going to be forced to choose between heating and eating? This is the conversation we need to be having now, because we don't have time to waste. Last year, Sir David King said what we do in the next 3 to 4 years will determine the future of humanity. So we're using these actions to get media attention because we need to get people talking about this now. And we know that civil resistance works. History has shown us that it works. I'm stood here today as a queer woman, and the reason that I'm able to vote, the reason I'm able to go to university, hopefully someday marry the person I love, is because of people who have taken part in civil resistance before me.
Okay, so I mean, I heard what you were saying, Matt, about having two minds on it. I will say this, like, seeing people feel feeling encouraged to act and try to participate in politics, I think is a good thing. So I'm not going to jump on that. But I'm going to tell y'all right now, and I think might split the audience a bit. I'm less upset about the symbolism of the protest, though I will say I don't. For me, it's not a hit. But I'm not somebody who's really going to get worked up about it. I think that's like what the right wing is really interested in doing.
Can I just make a caveat there? Just jumping real quick. Like, I agree. Like, I think like you can argue it from actually art represents the sort of like asset that rich people and so you get attention.
Like museums are very good.
Right. Exactly. That's the other point, other side of the coin. And I think that's a coin to flip, basically. Yeah. So go on.
But what I'm saying is like those kind of questions, I think we're seeing how this is playing out nationally and internationally, right? Of how effective it is. And I think you can see the limits of that kind of action. Very divisive. She's certainly right. A lot of folks, or they're certainly right. A lot of folks are talking about this. It's true. But what kind of conversations are being had? I don't think it's necessarily going to be a huge success in the sense of people having the necessary conversations about climate change. And even with that caveat, right, I also think that that's a very limited goal for politics. Like, this is something that has been a part of the climate movement for a long time. It's like, what we need like awareness, and what we need the science. And the fact is that most people want to live in a safe and comfortable future, a future where not only do they think that they'll be able to live, but their children will be able to live, but also in the here and now, living in the future, in the present, that they can afford to live in. And there's been no doubt about it that over the past few years, particularly in Europe, people are facing the punishment of one, industrial policy, which is tied solely to fossil fuels, which means that when there is a crisis, like what's happening with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, people suffer. Or when there is a crisis like COVID-19 and oil production drops dramatically, people suffer because the price of oil jumps up. I say all that because like these are needs that people have, and you see people respond to them. So what is the solution to this crisis? Is it awareness, or is it actually having like politically viable strategies that can achieve some form of transition? And you've started to see some more movements in the United States, I think, to looking towards labor and union activity as a very, very key, crucial partner of the environmental movement, something that had been lacking for a very long time. And it's not enough today, but you're starting to see that turn, because at the end of the day, a policy like just stopping all oil permits is not going to do very much when it comes to making renewables cheaper, right? You need to have the industrial policy alongside it. Because the fact is, there's a reason that capitalists are more interested in investing in oil than they are in investing in other in other renewable sources. The IRA in the United States, which we've talked about at length, we had Donna Noor on the program, if you want to listen to that, tries to think basically like the fundamental idea of the theory of change there is that if we can make these investments more attractive to private capital, then maybe we can start to get the movement the movements that we need. But I think there's people rightfully have a lot of skepticism about how far, for example, Biden's IRA goes in being able to provide those things. We need state level investment in renewable technology if we want to be, moving and transitioning to a greener economy. Of course, in addition, with a just transition. But what is being argued for here would be like we inherently understand. I think on the left now, I hope so, why we don't support like high taxes on oil and gas, because something like that disproportionately affects poor and working people when the price of gasoline goes up. You see it. I mean, you're seeing it now as we're starting to see gas prices creep up again, because of decisions by OPEC plus. There is going to be a political backlash. And is it because all of these Americans are climate change deniers? No, they're mad because the things that they need on a daily basis to be able to get to work, to be able to heat their homes, to be able to take care of themselves and their families are getting much more expensive. So any kind of policy or like transition that we want to be pushing for has to wrestle with that fundamental fact. And you see them talking about it, the just stop oil people, when they say there's a decision between heating and eating. But I haven't seen enough of a commitment in their literature to really supporting the kind of green transition that we argue for. I highly suggest if you're just watching us for the first time, reading Matt Huber's book, Climate Change is Class War, listening to the interviews that we've done with him on this, because the fact is like, yes, it is dire. And that's why it's actually really important that we get very serious about what we're talking about and what we're advocating for, because when we're talking about transitioning away from fossil fuels to renewable energy, we need to understand the stakes of what we're talking about. The stakes of them are huge. On one hand, on the level of averting climate change, which is a huge disaster and it's ongoing, right? And trying to prevent that. But then on the other side, changing an extremely entrenched global economy, and the way that we power our homes, the way that we keep the hospital lights on, the way that we get food to each other. How are we going to make sure that we're doing that in a way that isn't going to be something where working class people are going to be thrown under the bus? Because Macron wants that. The center left people are very happy for it. They're very happy to argue for this kind of green austerity. And I think if you were to talk to folks in the Just Stop Oil, they would generally agree that they don't want the punishment to go on the backs of the workers. And so I'm not accusing them of acting in bad faith. What I'm saying is that this is the fundamental concern, and we've done for years, for my whole life. Climate change has been something that we've been talking about and been very worried about. And why aren't we doing something? What can we do? Right. And for a long time, the best that people could think of was like, if we raise awareness, things are going to change. Until you deal with the fact that private power prefers fossil fuel systems over renewable energy systems, prefers fossil fuel systems over systems like nuclear power, which can provide tremendous amounts of energy to people at very low cost. Until we start to recognize that and recognize that the fight against entrenched financial interests and the fight for climate change are very much attached to each other, not in some moralistic way either, not just like, oh, these evil guys sitting there, like we can say like, fuck those CEOs, I don't care about them. But if you're just hoping that one day we change their hearts and everybody's going to wake up, and things will be different, you're making a wrong analysis, because there is a reason why fossil fuel is still so heavily invested in. So I bring all that up just to say that like we have to move beyond this kind of paradigm where the fight about climate change is about, well, can we start a conversation or raising awareness, and recognize that what we're talking about is waging a fight on the level of industrial production in the United States and the United Kingdom and all across the globe. And how do we do that? The way that we do that is we mobilize the forces that we have on our side, and that side is working people and the working class. Embed ourselves in the union fights. Right here in Texas, you are seeing entrenched fights by the oil and gas industry against oil and gas workers. That's a place we should be. That's a place we should be showing up and fighting with them. We have to really rethink this strategy, because great. It's brave and it's inspiring that people are willing to go and deal with like the abuse that they're going to get for going out there and taking actions. I don't want to take anything away from people who are doing that, but we've been doing that for a very long time, and you got to recognize where we are at is a result of this kind of failed, activism, spectacle first policy. What we need is politics.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, like, you widen this out to the context or put in a relief to the defund the police stuff. And like, I'm somebody who basically agreeable to a lot of the police abolition agenda. I cheat in that I consider, like, detectives to be distinct from police and things like that. I think a lot of abolitionists do. But anyway, without litigating that, the problem with the defund the police slogan, and again, I don't like to, like, even that one, I don't like to, like, always stick my oar in and say this is what you should be saying. But from just an analysis level, it's negative, and that's just descriptive of it. I'm not moralizing. It's a negation of funding, right? And just like this, it's stop oil. You're just negating. We need to have, like, a positive vision for these things. Otherwise, like, I mean, for all the reasons that we always talk about.
Absolutely. And again, like, if you're one, you can read my works on this in Jacobin Magazine, Why Liberal Climate Policy is Failing in Texas. You can go and read Matt Huber's work, listen to interviews that we've done with him, because these are very serious questions. And, like, for a long time, I was just being like most socialists. I think climate change is real and we should do something about it. But what I think people really need to understand is that the stakes are very high. Incredible amounts of money are moving in one direction. And we have to ask ourselves, one, the question of, like, how can we decarbonize? And two, also, what is that decarbonized world going to look like? And for a long time, I think on our side, I'm talking criticism of our movement, not environmentalists at large, our movement, the socialist movement, hasn't really investigated what a transition would look like. And I think that puts us at a disadvantage, and we have to really rapidly build up the working consciousness that will be necessary to win these fights. Because the fights for, the just transition is going to be hard. For example, when you don't have the rootedness in the union movement in the United States that we should, you're seeing that play out right now in the state of California, what these things are looking like. And recognize that it's really important to be looking towards the players in the game. I'm not just talking about the financial interests. I'm talking about the working class interests, the people who work in these industries, to be helping us fight and lead these transitions versus finding ways, which a lot of environmentalists have been doing for a long time. I think it's getting a bit better, but it's not where it needs to be. Demonizing people. So that's the first one. But we're doing this kind of omnibus thing on like protests in general, right? And let's get to the second one, unless you had anything else you wanted to add.
No, I think that does that. Yeah,
this one,
and it's funny because, like, I do feel a little like this position is like YouTubers talk about protesters. It's a semi-awkward one. And even, look, I'll give it up to the LaRoucheites. Good job for getting out there, folks.
being outside.
And it's that's done.
Okay, so I'm gonna just, before even setting it up, let's play the clip as most people saw it, and then let's give the context, if that makes sense, Matt. So the only context I will give is this is at a town hall, one of AOC's town halls, where she gets heckled.
Congresswoman, none of this matters unless there's a nuclear war, which you voted to send arms and weapons to Ukraine. Tulsi Gabbard, she's left the Democratic Party because they're a bunch of war hawks. Okay? You originally voted, you ran as an outsider, yet you've been voting to start this war in Ukraine. You're voting to start a thermonuclear war with Russia and China. Why are you playing with the lives of American citizens? You're playing with our lives.
There will be no neighbors if there's a nuclear bomb. You voted to mobilize and send money to Ukrainian Nazis. You're a coward. You're a progressive socialist. Where are you against the war mobilization? He's telling the right truth. You have done nothing. Tulsi Gabbard has shown guts where you've shown cowardice. I believed in you, and you became the very thing you sought to fight against. That's what you've become. You are the establishment, and you are the reason why everybody will end up in a nuclear war unless you choose to stand up right now and denounce the Democratic Party. Will you do that? Yes or no? Okay, simple. Are you going to stop nuclear war? Yes or no? There is no line, because this is bullshit. None of this matters if we're all dead. None of it. You know that. Then let's take it up right now, because this is the only thing that matters. This is the only thing that matters right now. We could be in a nuclear war.
You get where it's going.
I hadn't seen that part where it's like, this is a town hall. There's a line there. You want to get in line. It's like, that doesn't matter if there's a nuclear war. Well, I agree ultimately, but there wasn't a nuclear war in the time that line existed. So it turns out you could have got in line. Like, I could go to Chipotle and be like, hey, I need a burrito bowl. There's going to be a nuclear war possibly. And none of this matters if, there's a nuclear war. So why should I pay you?
And like, we're going to get into the bigger stuff. I'm not saying this is a non-issue, but I'm also not saying that this like overshadows the right to protest or anything like that. But the reason a lot of people are really upset in that town hall and what AOC is trying to say there is that they were doing a Q&A section, and because they tried to be inclusive of people who have like disabilities who might not be able to show up to an event like that in public, they were reading out questions from constituents who submitted them via email or online, who couldn't be there in person. So what the complaint was by people in AOC there was that, like, you're cutting in line of somebody who like could not be here and do what you're doing. Again, not saying that like, something like that immediately cancels out any right to maybe, say an uncomfortable truth to a politician. But I do think that context is worth knowing. Man, where to start? Well, I'm going to start. We're going to get into why this matters more, but I think it is very important for people to realize that this is not some kind of organic thing. The LaRouche people are back for better or for worse. And next week, we're actually going to have Brett O'Shea from Rev Left on the podcast, and we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about what LaRouche is. It's one of those things where, like, I only knew about it mainly as a kind of funny oddity that was out there. But the quick, dirty version of it is that the LaRouche movement is a far-right cult. Lyndon LaRouche started out as a member of the CPUSA, but very quickly turned to the far right and created this very fascinating and devastating, because they've are credibly been credibly accused of murder in other countries. They have sent their members to go and beat left-wing protesters with steel rods, right? Like, this goes from beyond just like having odious positions, right, to actually being something that you're encouraging people to go out there and harm people in general, but also notably people on the left. I bring all that up to say we're talking about this because these folks are back. I don't think they're a major force in American politics, but they are figuring out a way to get a decent amount of attention. And at this point, people will be like, well, why are you platforming them? Blah, blah, blah. Well, it's because it's on Tucker Carlson and people are talking about it now. So I think it's important for us to come out there with this kind of information. So that's the group there. And you can see all the weird stuff. I mean, before we get into some of like, is the criticism of AOC valid, all that kind of thing. Very fascinating to be talking about Tulsi Gabbard as somebody who's like principled anti-war, who is literally just got back from a mission with the United States Army. Like, you want to talk about somebody who's like anti-war, you can't talk about the person who's going and doing missions actively with the United States. The
obvious military plant who was back in like fucking 10 years ago to the right of Obama, saying he won't be clear enough about who our enemy is, namely radical Islam.
And there's if you wanted to compare AOC to another politician, there's plenty. You could talk about Bernie Sanders. You could talk about, who's been very clear about wanting peace and de-escalation there. You could talk about Lula, or you could talk about Jeremy Corbyn, somebody who has been demonized in UK media for his stance against like the war, right? Like, if you felt the need that you were wanting to have an example of somebody to maybe hold yourself up to, there are people out there who you could maybe use. But the fact that both of them mentioned Tulsi Gabbard, I think everyone shows that this is an up. But all of that backstory being brought up, Matt, do you got to give the far right credit?
Do you have to give them credit?
No. I don't think so.
There's a few. Yeah, I think like it's bad to not give that context, right? I think even if you 100% agreed with even the Tulsi stuff, or even let's say they didn't say anything about the Tulsi stuff, even if that was your position, that AOC needs to be stronger, and about how our military aid, how much military aid or that military aid is going to Ukraine, even if that's your position, like it's still like malpractice from my position as from a media commentator not to also give the context for that group's background, because you might somebody to think that this is a good place for me to invest my time. Like I'm ambivalent to like about the like the Just Stop Oil stuff. The LaRoucheites is like absolutely not. Like with the Just Stop Oil, I think it's like, well, maybe like, you know, DSA or a communist organization. Personally, that's my vibe. The LaRoucheites, I think it is absolutely malpractice. Like that's, you have to absolutely include that in the story, because I mean I've been seeing this for my entire fucking life. For being in undergrad and college, hearing a Ron Paul guy, you know, talk about being anti-war, and that was the first time I've heard of Ron Paul. The first time I heard of libertarians, and I'm like, oh, this is kind of interesting. I don't like the war, and then you go and actually do a little bit of research about Ron Paul, and it's like, not quite, right? And if I hadn't had like basically a developed economic sort of leftism at that point, who knows what sort of rabbit holes you could go down based on having an anti-war position. So yeah, I don't think you have to hand it to them. I think you have to warn people about them.
So, but you know, here's the rub, right? Like, so we talked about what this group is, and I think it is, yeah, as Matt was saying, it's worthwhile to recognize that these things are ops, not just in the sense of you know, not being sort of like genuine organic protesters, but also that these things are orchestrated from a group, and when they're orchestrated from a group like that, you have to ask why are they getting involved. But again, literally every time I've said something like this online recently, people, you know, get worked up and they're like, well, I support anybody who takes an anti-war stance. And I'm going to tell you right now that you don't have to do that, because there are plenty of people out there who have been advocating for de-escalation, right? Matt and myself, among them, who have been attacked very viciously for our position. Bronco Marchetich, somebody who writes almost daily on this subject now, gets no love from even a lot of people on the left for his position as correct and well researched, and will argue that it is. The point is that we are not in a situation where there's an absence of people who are talking about this subject. So in a moment like that, no, you do not have to hand it to the far right. Now, unless you had anything like on that, like on the actual substance of the criticism of AOC here, is it fair? Now, just my normal AOC disclaimer here. I mean, Matt, when we talk about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is it usually just say, hell yeah, AOC, you know, slay queen, or is it usually saying, hey, AOC seems to be stepping outside of what the Democratic Socialist Left movement is saying or wanting on this subject matter?
I'd say 2 to criticism, 1 to give her defend her, basically.
Yeah. So this is not a channel where we're spending all of our time saying you can't criticize AOC. She's the best that we have. This is we argue, in fact, not only regarding AOC, but in general, that having like accountability to like membership, accountability to the movement is an absolutely critical thing for any kind of left-wing politics. Has AOC been flawless and excellent on the question of Ukraine? No, I don't think that's I don't think that would be correct to say. But I also think that it's very incorrect. And what these kind of things try to do is utilize the fact that a lot of people don't follow, for example, congressional votes very closely, and don't know what's sort of happening in the political world other than maybe what they see on Twitter and what they see on interviews, right? And that's actually not why you send somebody to Congress. You send somebody to Congress to be able to take important votes on things and to be able to push certain positions, hopefully with a coalition, so that matters. But even if not, you know, to maybe stand up for sometimes for a voice that's being unheard. Is AOC somebody who has had her foot on the gas pedal of nuclear war in Ukraine? I think that is an absolutely ludicrous statement. Yes, it is true that AOC did vote for an aid package that went through Congress almost unanimously, that provided $10 billion to Ukraine. Around $2 billion would be going to the military, you know, in some capacity, right? Is that is that what some folks want? You could say maybe I don't think we should be funding any of the military. I'm not saying anything about that argument, but like maybe that's your position. Is that amount of money fueling a result in the conflict? I think that that's a little bit of a ridiculous, immaterial argument to make, right? This is not like the critical sole funding that is basically allowing this to happen. There are a lot of factors that have went into this crisis, that have went into Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There were a lot of groups in the West, in particular, who are working to scuttle any kind of peace talks before, as we know now, before the war started, and lumping in AOC with those people is very, very inaccurate and unfair. And yeah, we're going to break our rules and like defend AOC a little bit here. I don't know if we want to pull this up yet, Matt, unless you had anything else to say.
This tracker here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I might pull it up because
Aaron,
I don't know if it's just for me, but you're coming in a little blurry and it might be hard for people to read.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
That's no problem. Just letting you know. But you could walk us through it. I'll drive it.
Yeah, so I mean, Aaron. Actually, let me just share one thing real quick, David. Just this original thread where people can find this. Aaron Araf, quote tweets this tweet saying, "Jesus, she's voted for every military increase, funding for Israel's apartheid, and she signs every shitty bill Dems ask her to. She's for every illegal intervention. You guys are being played, and many at the DSA know it. I try to call anybody out. Oh, this person feels like 90%, but it feels like 90% of the AOC online haters from the left think she's voting on every military budget, voting yes on every military budget when in reality she's been a consistent yo vote and goes through the NDAs here. And yeah, if you wanted, and then he links this, and I've tweeted this out and recently put it into a thread, so people can find this on my Twitter account if they want to go check it out now.
Yeah, no, and yeah, we can even put it in the show notes too if people want to check this out. It's worthwhile because again, like there are criticisms to make about like the squad as a political force in American politics. Have they been standing with our movement in all the ways I think that they should? No. Do I think that there also needs to be like a much more stronger rootedness in the movement? Yes. But what is not helpful is the way that a lot of these online debates happen, where basically people can just make up whatever they want and they create these really wild false narratives. So this covers a lot of important votes for the left, but we can get into some of these, military. 2023 NDA, nay, and look at that. If I know these things probably aren't showing really well, but AOC is here, nay, including the rest of the squad. Defense spending, 2022, Cori Bush, nay, Rashida Tlaib, nay, AOC, nay, Ilhan Omar, nay, Ayanna Presley, nay, Barbara Lee, nay, Jamal Bowman, nay. So U.S. Sanction Impact Study, 2022 NDA, National Defense. Remember, that's the military budget right there, y'all. That's like the one that everyone, should care about. Nay votes, right? Should there be sanctions on Nicaragua? No. Should there vote for the 2022 NDAA? No. Squad, unanimous on this kind of thing, right? The infrastructure bill, which I know is not what we're talking about here, you also have, the progressive vote with the exception of Barbara Lee, right? And I'm not including Pramila Jayapal in that. I bring this up because it's like, this is important. This is not saying there's no criticism that can be made. This is not saying that there's, not things that we need to be working on. But it's really important not to allow fantastical politics, inaccurate information to cloudy your worldview. And a shitload of left-wing online media plays that game. If you took the average like Jimmy Dore listener, a lot of these other folks who are all in for Tulsi Gabbard, and you were to pull their audience, and what did AOC vote for the National Defense Authorization Act in 2022 and 2023? I bet you 80 to 90% of those people would say yes, right? And this is really, really dangerous kind of things because it does disillusion people. It does frustrate people. If AOC was out there making those votes, yes, we would be we would be extremely upset about this. But a lot of these kind of groups out here really thrive in areas of misinformation.
Yeah, a lot of these groups that again like don't mention any of these votes because ultimately like and we need to talk about this too. Like it's the ones that it's the decisive, and we've talked about this plenty of times. Like, and that's why we gave Jayapal the bum steer because of the Build Back Better thing. Like ultimately these decisive things. I mean, this shows up voting against the for the bipartisan infrastructure bill, right? Like. I guess I'm forgetting a little bit where I'm going with that, but yeah, it's just it doesn't help anybody. And like if you're one of these Congress people, like you're not these people aren't giving you credit for the ones you are voting the right way on. You're gonna go out on a limb for them for these fucking podcasters because they're constantly like not giving like basically rewriting your voting record more negative than it actually is. Like get out of here. Like you're not gonna. They're not like they're completely what they're doing is a poison pill. Like it's for any time like any staffers that might be in those offices that might actually want to listen to the left. They come across that stuff and it's like, well, fuck you. We voted. We look at all these fucking votes against the NDAs. Like, it's ridiculous.
Then we have, I just bring this up too, because it is also worthwhile to remember what's going on in the national conversation, because sometimes we can be a little insular on the left. This is from, the right wing. This is Washington Free Beacon. I just bring this up because, you have this, inaccurate view that AOC is the one who's got her foot on the gas pedal for nuclear conflict with Russia. And you have this from the Washington Free Beacon from a little while ago. Socialist Squad members defends vote to protect Russian oligarchs. Rep AOC on Thursday defended her opposition to a bill urging President Biden to fund Ukraine with assets seized from Russian oligarchs. Right, and they also throw in, other members of the squad here. I bring this up just to say that, AOC is somebody who is getting attacked from the right wing for not being hawkish enough on Russia, for being too soft, and maybe being, secretly aligned with Russian interests, right? Like that's the game that the right wing is playing. So I think it's important for us to be able to get these things right. Again, could AOC be doing a lot more in many areas? Yes. Could she be doing more on Ukraine? I think so. Is this criticism that's lobbed at her that she individually is throttling us into nuclear war with Russia? I don't think it's an accurate criticism. I'm sorry, I just do not find it to be an accurate criticism. You could say she hasn't done as much as we would like her to do on this, right? That's a conversation, that's a debate to be had. But no, that framing is nonsensical. And again, the reason why is because this isn't about educating people. This isn't about trying to build a genuine anti-war movement. It's an op by a fringe political cult that wants to get more attention for itself, and it certainly has gotten it.
Right. Yeah, and you say like, does it matter if the right wing is the one bringing these criticisms? Well, yeah, because they don't give a fuck if AOC blows her entire credibility, making a martyr of herself for this cause. Like you're not gonna like you would love that. Like simultaneously, you get to stand up for this. Like again, like that'd be a cost. If AOC did something that would massively threaten the Ukraine resistance effort, like that would be something we as the DSA might start getting investigated if something like that happens, right? And fair enough if you think that's a position that she should take, but fucking right wingers, they win on both sides of that. So they're not really concerned about the strategy. So that's why yes, it is relevant, I guess, to conclude.